angry spork. After the big two cross paths so epically, let's wind things down a bit and focus on a crossover between Marvel's two biggest teams. I'm taking issue with Bloodties, which sees a looming threat bringing together the Avengers and the X-Men. And in a first for the series, I've had this in my collection for several years, but haven't really gotten around to reading it until now. So this will be my first go-through. Should be interesting. Let's see if this comic makes us want to turn the page or turn our heads. We begin with Avengers number 368, Bob Harris writing, with Steve Epting and Tom Palmer on art. The cover features a cityscape in the background, some ominous smoke, and Professor Xavier facing the reader in his classic hover chair. Behind him are Beast, Captain America, the Maximoff twins, Quicksilver's wife Crystal holding their child Luna, and the Black Knight holding a knockoff lightsaber. It looks like they just finished a battle, so maybe it was with George Lucas's lawyers. Though eventually they'd both be consumed by the mouse. And before anyone tries to call cheat on this, even the cover says this is a crossover. So there. We open to the island republic of Genosha, specifically its capital city, Hammer Bay, and it's on fire. Oh, so New 52 Stephanie Brown just moved there. Fabian Cortez looks at the terrible beauty while telling a child about how the chaos was likely inevitable between mutants and humans. Once word of the fires gets out, Cortez expects a visit from the girl's parents and grandfather, and confirms the child he's holding is Luna Maximoff. Look, Pietro, I know parents need time away from their kids now and again, but you need to really up your standards on babysitters. In Washington, D.C., the State Department has a Bureau of Mutant Affairs, and currently Dr. Valerie Cooper, director of the Mutagenic Relations and associate of X-Factor, shows smuggled video of Genosha's carnage to Henry Peter Gyrick of the National Security Council and S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury, looking like he just got back from going undercover in a 90s-era Image comic. Tensions on the island were bad enough with a virus spreading across the mutate population, but then sometime before this, Magneto generated an EM pulse wave to show the world he was still a-kickin', after not being heard from for some time. So rather than risk the master of magnetism and setting former slave mutants into rebellion, the humans decided to just kill them all. Because that's going to go over well with one of the world's most powerful mutants that's also a Holocaust survivor. The mutates started fighting back with their powers, and the hopes of a unified Genosha begin dissolving, blamed on Magneto's actions, though strangely not blaming the slavery or attempted genocide. Smart. Gyrick is assigned to escort the president's candidate to broker a peace settlement, and they'll be joined by two mutants' rights activists, Philip Moreau, whose father was the first to develop the mutate bonding process, so his family carries some weight, and Jennifer Ransom, about whom we get no information at this time. Valerie elaborates that new intelligence suggests things could get worse, which is where Nick Fury comes in, who has to be told this is a non-smoking area and puts out his stogie. Lots of disgusting things in life, Val. Some even make smoking look downright respectable. Unless Joe Quesada's in charge, in which case smoking is probably the worst thing you can possibly do. Not like pacts with Satan. Those are not only okay, but sometimes encouraged. Anyway, Nick seems to disagree with the president's plan, though so far all we know is that it seems to involve containing the Avengers at all costs. Jump to a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier where 3 warplanes take off as they're sent encoded orders. Classified Alpha Prime Apla. I think that last one was a typo meant to be another Alpha. The wing leader needs reconfirmation of their coordinates, and he gets it, with orders to secure and subdue as needed. And he seems mighty unsettled at the prospect. At Avengers Mansion, a gathering of West and East Coast teams are told by Fury that the UN and Washington consider Genosha's problems strictly domestic, so super types, Avengers in particular, are benched until given the word otherwise. The government telling superheroes what to do. Can't think of where I've heard that before. Since they don't usually interfere with other countries' affairs, Black Widow asks why the US government is telling them to sit and wait now. As Gyrick takes US agent out of the room to talk about a special mission, Fury says that there are reasons, even though he can't specify, and the feds are serious about the Avengers staying put. Despite the Black Knight wanting specifics and Hercules being indignant, Fury reminds them they signed up to work for the UN. Getting involved would set precedents for superhumans to influence and disrupt the natural order. Hawkeye, not liking the idea of letting people die, wonders if Nick was influenced to cave to politics, and Fury don't like his tone one bit. Captain America, ever the diplomatic leader, asks why the UN thinks the Avengers would interfere, since they stayed out of Genosha's previous crisis. Seems that, alongside Magneto's return making people on edge, word has it someone might want to take a strike at the team, as a statement on human-mutant relations. Crystal leaps to the conclusion that they'll want to hurt her child for being Magneto's granddaughter and a human. She goes so far as to use her powers against Scarlet Witch for trying to hold her back, and runs out of the room saying that Professor X warned them about something like this back in Avengers 350.
Avengers, assemble! Our back issues from last year and confirm whether or not she's right.
Crystal runs to the fellow Inhuman Marilla, who is kind of like the nanny to the Inhuman royal family. And it just so happens she was going to take a walk in the garden with Luna. She hands the girl off to Crystal, but the kid's eyes turn red, a clear signal for Dane to palm strike her out of the woman's arms. And maybe whatever is wrong with her is spreading because his eyes turn red too. Where's the Visine when you need it? Though mentioned and occurring off-panel, fake Luna melts and reforms into a bald woman surging with energy, and wearing a bodysuit numbered 682. With more of the team showing up, she poetically chides the world's indifference to the mutants suffering within Genosha, threatening more than her people's blood will be shed, and to show that not even the Avengers are safe, she explodes. We jump to Gyrick and US Agent at the Xavier School 60 miles away?
But they just left right before Crystal went nuts. And only a short time after that came the Earth's mightiest hero shattering kaboom. Unless those two teleported or ran at top speed to a supersonic jet and immediately took off, I don't see how they could have gotten far enough away to not hear that explosion. Or was Crystal running through the mansion for 20 minutes before finding the spy with the ever-so-convenient power set of shape-shifting and self-detonation?
Also present are the two activists mentioned earlier, Philip and Jennifer, the latter of whom is a mutate, and they plead with Charles Xavier for his assistance in quelling the violence. Other mutates have begun acting as cruel as their oppressors. This war has turned a peaceful populace into killers, and I don't see how decent people can sit around and do nothing. No offense, sir.
Oh, don't worry. Soon enough Marvel will write me as a huge jackwagon. But I still come out of it looking better than Cyclops.
And in case you're curious and aren't already aware, according to the Marvel Wiki, the mutates of Genosha were mutants who had their powers modified by a process created by Philip's father, David Moreau. Xavier agrees with Phil and Jen's sentiments, frightened of the future that would result in doing nothing. Even if the president hadn't contacted him for the job, he'd still want to go. Otherwise, how could he claim to have a soul? However, on top of the protection offered by Gyrick and US Agent, he'd like to bring along a +1, Hank McCoy, one-time Avenger and renowned biogeneticist. And you gotta love how Beast is already prepared with a Hawaiian shirt. Gyrick is at first put off by this, since he's kind of an anti-mutant person, but as he readies another smoke, he seems to relax, mentioning the footage of violence that was smuggled out despite the Genoshan government's best efforts, and how it was recorded by Trish Tilby, McCoy's girlfriend.
Reporter love interests, not just for Superman anymore.
While some of the X-Men go through a Danger Room simulation, Cyclops and Jean Grey observe from the control booth, accompanied by Quicksilver. He's contemplating seeing his wife and child again, try and save his marriage, before he returns to X-Factor, and Scott tells him to follow his heart. Pietro claims he might not even have one. So, he's Mutanity's Martin Shkreli? Iceman's goofing off, using his powers to deflect a laser beam and hitting Rogue across the thigh, which I think counts as transitive sexual harassment. And Gambit retaliates with a charged card since it's his territory. The simulation ends, Rogue's suit mildly damaged from Bobby's prank, and she threatens to send Gambit flying if he tries to kiss and make it better, and renounces his claim of being anyone's territory. Storm scolds Drake for his antics, despite his desire to ease tensions, and he tries restarting the program, but Charles telepathically calls time out on that.
I am Xavier, the great and powerful. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain with the hover chair.
As he had anticipated, he and Beast are heading for Genosha now, and he's worried that their interference on Avalon in X-Men 25 may have been too late.
Gyrick is concerned Magneto might show up and make things worse. But see, shortly before this, in X-Men number 25, Mags ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's bones. So Charles countered by breaking his brain and leaving him a vegetable. Guess he decided to keep that under his hat. Or toupee.
Despite the team's previous unpleasant experiences on the island, they're ordered to rendezvous in Hammer Bay in 12 hours, even if Wolverine had already left, and oddly it's Cyclops that's worried that they can't handle the mission without him. Forgot you can wreck a mountain with your eyeballs there, Scotty? Anyway, they're to be on the Blackbird in 30 minutes because I guess it takes 11.5 hours to get to Genosha, and Jean apologizes to Pietro for having to delay his family reunion, but assuring him his wife and child are probably fine. Meanwhile, at the Contradiction, Crystal managed to instinctively create a cyclone that forced the explosion upward, sparing everyone else its deadly force. While Circe, whoever she is, seems impressed by the mutate dying for a political cause, Crystal is too distraught to share the sentiment, with Dane trying to comfort her. Nick Fury arrives, accompanied by other Avengers, and Scarlet Witch lays blame on him for putting her niece in danger. Nick points out they only knew an attack was possible, not any details on how or when. He says S.H.I.E.L.D. will handle things, but Crystal objects by tossing Fury aside with her powers. She swears to get her daughter back and make the rebels that have her pay, and much of the team begin following her charge. Fury stops Cap, clarifying that he and S.H.I.E.L.D. are under orders to stop the Avengers' interference, no matter what. Sure enough, on a 2-page spread, a platoon from the Strategic Hazard Intervention Espionage Logistic Directorate stands in the way of the Avengers.
Yeah, the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D. stood for something fairly different back then. But at some point, I guess they figured they didn't need a comma in the middle of their full name.
Meanwhile, Team Peaceful Resolution is on their way to Genosha, prepping for their mission in each their own way. Charles looking over maps, and Beast thinking about taking 40 Winks, possibly as a cover for his worry over his lady friend. A distorted transmission comes over the comms using a Stark transceiver to clean it up, and we see Trish Tilby, reporting that the entire Genoshan government has been assassinated by mutate rebels. She cuts to self-proclaimed rebel leader Fabian Cortez, seated in the Citadel, surrounded by dead bodies, and still holding Luna. Declaring himself a follower of Magneto, he says a new day has dawned, one where humans like the girl he holds will suffer. If the army does not lay down their arms by the next day, Cortez will force evolutionary destiny by calling for the deaths of every human man, woman, and child. The issue closes on Xavier, mortified at the cycle of death, continuing into the next generation.
The stakes are established, we got a couple interesting surprises, and the pacing wasn't too bad. And that all adds up to a pretty good starting point for the story. Though there was that odd 60-mile jump to the X-Mansion. It was just poorly juxtaposed to their previous location. There are references to previous stories, so some readers may be in the dark, but I don't think it's hurt this read so far. But then I did read Fatal Attractions, so there's that.
On to the next chapter, X-Men number 26, written by Fabian Nicieza, with art by Andy Kubert, Matt Ryan, and Joe Rosas. The cover features 2 Avengers and 2 X-Men, With Rogue, Cyclops, and Scarlet Witch looking like they're about to face some unseen danger, while Captain America is either bracing for an incoming Acme anvil or belting out a power ballad. Inside, narration describes the Blackbird moving across the South Atlantic, how it's been a full fortnight since Magneto's EM attack that raised mutant-human tensions, and we see Quicksilver's reaction to seeing his daughter in Cortez's arms. Rogue restrains him, saying that listening to the abductor may provide them enough information to save the girl, so they all quiet down to listen to Trish Tilby's report. The transmission isn't all that clear, since the aforementioned electromagnetic pulse wave across the planet still adversely affects communications, but hey, what you gonna do? Narration tells us that Cortez attempted a traitorous power move on Magneto, and now the guy's trying to protect himself from magnetized fury by adding to Genosha's civil unrest.
I'm a little unsure about revealing something like that in narration. If it wasn't intended to be some big revelation down the line, it feels like it'd make more sense if a character mentioned it in either inner or outer dialogue. Maybe it's just that they were counting on readers having already known of Cortez's past actions, and that would have made this little more than a footnote.
Cortez calls on all mutates and mutants to worship the words and example given to them by Magneto, to provide courage and rise against their oppressors in spite of token gestures from the human government. Mankind won't give them the power they deserve, so they need to take it by force. Cyclops notes, at least I'm pretty sure it's him, there's no tail indicator on this batch of speech bubbles, how people are ready to kill and fight for Magneto, not knowing that Professor Xavier wiped his mind. Quicksilver, feeling his dad got what was coming to him, only hears the same Magneto spiel from Cortez, and is angry he can't do anything about his daughter being a pawn, not even taking consolation in Storm's promises to save Luna. "If I have learned one thing in my life, Windrider, it is that only a fool makes any kind of allowance for hope and happy endings."
You're Dan Didio, aren't you?
Ororo counters that Luna's abduction from the Avengers mansion shows Cortez's desperation to shield himself from Magneto, which, yeah, this would have been a good place to describe the Acolyte's betrayal right here instead, and that is the key to her rescue. Though Pietro finds it absurd, Psyche concurs, saying that strategically this could work in their favor, compounded by Gambit saying that they can convince Cortez he'll need the Xavier students to protect him from the catatonic Magneto. "Which is what I like to see for a change. The X-Men going into a fight with an ace up our sleeves."
And that pun is the only reason Gambit was brought on this mission. You can toss him out of the plane now.
As Trish Tilby wonders why Magneto doesn't speak for himself, the broadcast plays in Avalon, Magneto's space station haven, where the catatonic man is watched over by Colossus, who left the X-Men in the Fatal Attraction storyline. But that clearly hasn't changed his sense of fashion. The older notes are they could easily take a live image of Eric Lencher's current state, relying on life support machinery, but he wonders if that would help or hurt Genosha. Exodus, Magneto's right-hand mutant, walks in, sensing the former X-Man's inner conflict, and asks why he parted ways with the team in the first place. Petey says that he grew tired of being a destructive force for other people's ambitions. He'd prefer to use his agricultural and artistic skills to create something good. Exodus calls him naive, and that Charles Xavier's pacifism will still need to be worked out of him, but for now, he wants a private chat with his leader. You know, the guy with the steam-cleaned brain.
I just thought of how Magneto can control this situation. Who here has seen Weekend at Bernie's?
As Colossus looks upon the Earth, wondering what manner of nuttiness he's gotten himself involved in, the Avengers are fighting it out with S.H.I.E.L.D. Crystal declares she doesn't want to hurt them, but has to save her child, and Wanda notes that they know the agents are just following orders. Then Awkward mentions to her sis-in-law that they could easily get rid of them, but don't want to hurt them. It's just weird dialogue progression. And that's not even mentioning how they say things to each other that they already know, like Luna being Wanda's niece. The pair use the brawl as a cover to get to a Quinjet, and Black Knight decides to help. Hercules gives them cover by hurling a huge chunk of wreckage at the helicarrier above, and while onboard Commander Dum Dum Dugan talks big, he takes the hint and orders them back to sea. Nick Fury is arguing with Cap, who's knocking back a couple of agents, until Dane knocks Fury out with his Nero blade. The captain doesn't think that what they're doing is necessarily smart, but the Black Knight hops into the nearby aircraft saying that the smart thing and the right thing aren't always the same. So Steve tells him to fire up the engines.
These couple of pages and the panels are just a bit confusing. Between the vagueness of some of the background art and how much of a given panel that Cap, Nick, and the beaten agents take up, it was difficult enough to tell that they were anywhere near an aircraft, let alone right outside the cockpit. And the following page has an overhead shot of Dane entering the pilot's seat, so that didn't help much either. It just seemed all the more surprising.
Unfortunately, they're surrounded by more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and taking off would incinerate them. After Cap contacts Black Widow, she confers with War Machine to help clear the area of aggressors and fly alongside them to deter pursuit, made easier with Hercules having scared off the helicarrier earlier. Cersei, fixating on the Black Knight and not exactly enjoying the thought of him being alone with Crystal, tags along. We don't see her get to the plane, so we have to assume she flew there based on what Vision says. Hercules doesn't like being left out of the fight, but Hawkeye tells him they're about to have a brawl of their own against the politicians at the UN.
Combating bureaucracy was the seldom remembered 13th labor of Heracles.
After several pages of ads from Marvel's Midnight Suns imprint, whatever that was, and man do those ghosts look lame, we cut back to Genosha, narration detailing the irony of a beautiful, mountainous landscape running across the center of the very island Professor X is trying to unify. He and his ragtag envoy are driving along when they're ambushed by gas grenades. Charles psychically instructs Beast to grab some gas masks and take them both up the cliff. He intends to meet with the mutate rebels to better understand the current turmoil, and it's better if the others aren't involved. They come upon a squad of commandos that aren't big on pleasantries, though one of them seems pretty laid back, enough to just be sitting all chill-like. But when Beast takes off Charles's mask, they're greeted by Renee Majcombe, an old friend of Chuck's who happens to be a biogeneticist and leader of the bipartisan rebel battalion, comprised of humans and mutates, devoted to stopping atrocities from both sides. And despite limited resources, they managed to get Chuck a modified wheelchair, X-brand and everything.
But it doesn't hover, does it? I mean, yes, this is a war zone and people are slaughtering each other at the drop of a hat, but you couldn't spring for a hover chair. Okay, I'll make do.
As their transport arrives, Majcombe explains that before fighting broke out, she was one of the many that felt the Genoshan government wasn't doing enough to heal the divide of the populace. Laws written on paper cannot undo years of ingrained social behavior. Well, she ain't wrong. So she prepared for situations like the one they're facing, with other scientists, social workers, lawyers, and so on. As they begin heading away from Hammer Bay, Charles apologizes to Hank that they won't be heading to save Trish, that focusing on saving the many is for the greater good. War makes for difficult decisions, where friends and loved ones risk being sacrificed to end the madness. And unbeknownst to them, U.S. Agent has hitched a ride.
Until they drive over a rock that's in just the right place and is just the right size to smack him in the face. Which I hope they don't skip over. That'd be hilarious.
An hour passes and the X-Men land 2 miles from the Genoshan capital, cloaking their ship after some brief commentary on the effect their previous trip to Genosha had. Since she was with Wolverine at the time, Rogue can't help but wonder what the old knucklehead has been up to since he left a week prior. She's told that while everyone misses him, they have to respect his wishes, and yeesh, this just looks weird. Looks like Storm is smushing her cheek right into Rogue's eye. Shouldn't that be draining her powers? Anyway, they start... Hey, is that Revanche? The woman Psylocke switched bodies with? Come to think of it, she was on board during Fabian Cortez's monologue, but she hasn't had any lines. Okay, moving on. They're about to split into 3 teams when they're confronted by a trio known as the Unrelenting, or the Unforgiven. It sounds good to be either one at first. If you're not here to kill any and all human scum who oppose us, then we will turn our attentions to you and show you why Cortez has bestowed upon us the title of The Unforgiven.
Is it because you all really like that Clint Eastwood movie? Yeah. Yes.
Psyche informs them they're there to stop the killing, not join in. When one of the mutates says that isn't Magneto's way, Pietro goes ballistic, delivering a flurry of speed punches while saying Magneto's way left him a vegetable. And who would happen to be within earshot but Cortez, his suspicions of Magnus now confirmed. Then nothing can stop me from seeing this country, and everyone in it, awash in a raging river of bloodshed.
Quicksilver went all punch-happy on just one goon, and we don't even know if that was enough to knock him out. Even if it did, there are still two others that likely just heard their vaunted leader say he wanted everyone on the island dead. Not just humans, everyone. Man, Cortez is stupid.
In Hammer Bay, narration mentions that Havershaw Heights was but a week ago a ritzy section of the city exclusive to the ruling upper class. Now, the caviar class has joined the sewer scrapers in the streets, face to face, hand to hand, bound together by an unholy matrimony of genetic diversity, until death do them part.
I kind of like that line. It has a certain sad juxtaposition with the words and the imagery, and it really works for the moment. Marriage, which is intended to be joyous and enduring, against the contradictory sight of people at each other's throats. Which actually comes with the betrothal territory, come to think of it. Ha-cha-cha-cha!
The Avengers have arrived on the scene, ready to put a stop to the fighting by fighting! Narration describes how tired Genoshans are of the conflict and the hatred, and how the Avengers are seen by humans as the leading authority figures. Wanda turns down a mutate's request for her to lead them, and then when the humans goes all, if you don't want the Avengers, we'll take them. But this is all too distracting for Crystal, ready to use a hurricane to hasten their search for her daughter. Then she's interrupted by the explosive attack that selectively incinerates the human fighters. The issue closes on the arrival of Exodus, declaring that if it saves the mutates, every human will be exterminated.
Seems his little chat with his savior got a little one-sided. Lord Magnus, what should I do? Yes, murder all the humans on Genosha. That's just what I was thinking. Why, thank you, my lord. I don't think this cape is too showy either. Butter pecan is my favorite flavor of ice cream, too.
The pacing and time progression isn't perfect, but it doesn't detract too much from the immersion of the story. Sometimes the dialogue can feel very expository for the sake of the reader, even though the characters are already aware of the information they're relaying. It's this kind of situation that the narrative captions would have probably worked better in place of the dialogue.
And after the show, I'm going to redeem this coupon, good for $5 off a Sega Genesis or Super NES game, and a free Ghost Rider collector's issue. Just need to find the nearest KB toy store and... Uh-oh.
And you know, for someone like me that was kind of inconsistent with the periods in which he bought X-Men comics, it's easy to forget that Magneto's a grandfather. Even if you know that Pietro is his son and he's married to Crystal and they have a kid together, it's hardly ever brought up. I don't know if they've ever had a scene where Magneto just talks or interacts with Luna. It'd be nice to see here, even though he's catatonic, but yeah, that's probably not likely. And on an unrelated note, how come no one told me that Lorenzo Lamas was one of the Avengers? And that he's apparently a big Hunger Games fan.
Next week, we see Exodus face off against the Avengers, and how the X-Men deal with Cortez now that their ace in the hole was spoiled by Marvel's quickest mouth. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with Bloodties. Defying the UN and fighting off S.H.I.E.L.D., the Avengers have sent a small contingent to the war-ravaged island of Genosha. On the team is Crystal, mother to Luna Maximoff, who is being held captive by Fabian Cortez. The X-Men, with Quicksilver, Luna's father, have also arrived on the island and face some troubles of their own. And the conflict doesn't exactly get better when Magneto's Lieutenant Exodus arrives on the scene.
We continue with Avengers West Coast number 101, written by Roy Thomas with art by Dave Ross, Tim Zahn, and Bob Sharon. The cover features Exodus grappling with War Machine against a white backdrop, while a sidebar shows the heads of Captain America, Beast, and two characters who have contributed nothing to the story so far, Gambit and Spider-Woman, who I don't think was even part of the Genoshan strike team, so I don't know what they're teasing here. We open to a splash page of Hawkeye slamming open a door with the UN's logo on it, Vision and Spider-Woman following behind. "Alright, people, let's get down to cases!"
I have never heard that particular phrasing before. Down to business, or brass tacks, sure, but down to cases? Maybe it's a regional thing from one of the writers. Or maybe Hawkeye's just weird.
On a 2-page spread, Barton and more Avengers are surrounded by armed and armored security. Giant Man suggests more tact than Clint is displaying, and Hercules agrees, but the Archer doesn't seem to change his tune. "Let's talk turkey about this Genosha business."
Sorry if that confused you, Ambassador from Turkey.
However, the UN Security Council was just in the middle of an emergency session, and reminds the team that they are responsible to the UN, not the other way around. Though I wonder why no one's asked how a group of colorfully costumed people managed to get in without raising any kind of alarm or ruckus. Hawkeye calls them out for sending S.H.I.E.L.D. after them, while letting the deaths in Genosha go on as an internal conflict, citing the real-life siege of Sarajevo, which, at the time of this comic's printing, was already a year and a half into its eventual 3-year, 10-month span.
It's not a conflict I'm particularly familiar with, so I've put a link in the description to the Wikipedia page if you're interested. Sure, you could Google it yourself, but chances are there are a slew of strangely convincing websites with conspiracy nonsense and complete lack of evidence, so why waste precious seconds on any of that?
Spider-Woman notes she's siding with the Bowman on this one, while Vision keeps to himself, and after Hawkeye threatens to terminate the Avengers Charter with the UN, the Secretary notices that Black Widow may disagree, and worries that this may be the end of the Avengers. Because we needed a dramatic segue as we jump back to Genosha, where Exodus asks Captain America and his teammates if they're there to help mutants against the humans. But the group doesn't know who the mulleted menace is, or why he felt it necessary to turn people into cinders instead of merely incapacitating them. Then Crystal starts asking about the whereabouts of her child, and this isn't what the servitor of Lord Magnus wants to hear right now, especially after his dramatic and deadly introduction, so he decides to leave. Since, there's just no reasoning with humans or corrupted mutants. Crystal tries using her elemental powers to stop him, but is knocked back, described by Cersei in such a way that reads like something you'd hear from a 1980s G.I. Joe toy commercial. "Even Crystal's elemental powers were no match for his psionic eye blasts." Scarlet Witch says the Acolyte should be building bridges with humanity, but is merely shrugged off before War Machine confronts the villain. Exodus vocally justifies his previous murders, Rhodes at first telling him how wrong he is, but stops before getting too worked up, remembering that there's just no reasoning with racists.
Does that make Exodus an internet troll?
As their battle intensifies above, humans and mutates regroup on the ground, noted by Wanda as caring more about butchering each other than the presence of the Avengers. A gas main explodes, Cap and Black Knight are trying their best to be non-lethal, but the citizens seem determined to destroy themselves. Cersei has gotten Crystal back on her feet, who options to take care of the crowd herself. She, I guess according to Cap, brings down a sea from the sky, apparently also pulling a Moses and parting it, keeping the two sides apart. Though the art makes it seem a bit more like it's just wind, that and the whoosh sound effect. But hey, it's blue, so water. Chris just wants to get to Luna,
I just want my kids back.
and heads out on her own. Except that Wanda decides to tag along. Cap and Dane can handle things, and there doesn't seem to be much they can do to affect the outcome of War Machine's fight with Exodus, though her inner monologue indicates she wants to keep Crystal from killing anyone.
Well, when you consider that Wanda's powers are often described as altering probability fields, Crystal's own elemental abilities, and that just moments ago Cersei was concerned that the two groups were about to overwhelm Black Knight and Steve, you'd think that there's plenty they could do in that battle. On the other hand, you can't really blame Crystal for having a one-track mind when that track is called Missing Child.
And remember how U.S. Agent hitched a ride on Professor X's secret mission? Well, unceremoniously, that's been revealed to Chuck off-panel. But Beast doesn't like the idea of a non-mutant tagging along. Charles notes how he sounds like the misguided souls they've previously encountered, equating species pride with innate superiority, but no explanation as to why Beast would say that in the first place.
While I haven't read all the X-Men comics, those that I have that have featured Hank McCoy have always shown him being much smarter than to think like this. If he was concerned about a human superhero causing tension in a given situation merely by being present, I guess you could see it that way, but it would also be nonsense because they're there to help a group of mutates and humans. But we get no context as to why Beast is talking with such closeted prejudice.
Not that Agent seems to care. After an exchange about homonyms that, to me, kind of falls flat, U.S. Agent and Beast bust down a wall revealing a prison of hundreds of mutates cramped together, which Chuck likens to World War II atrocities, and appropriately so. As for why they aren't busting out using their powers, that is elucidated by the flash grenade entrance of the Magistrate Elite. Context for them later, maybe, as we jump to the X-Men battling Cortez's Unforgiven. Jean is hit with an energy blast that makes her lose her concentration to keep levitating, and is about to be cut up if not for a certain Cajun's intervention. And I guess they thought they were being clever with this bit of dialogue that reminds us his name is Gambit, but it just comes off as unnatural to me. Anyway, Remy does his thing, only to be hit by Skelter's null grav ray, sending him skyward while throwing an old-school Honeymooners reference. Rogue manages to catch him before he leaves the atmosphere, fortunately not bad hurt by a blast from earlier, which seems less like Remy's dialect and just terrible grammar in general. Ororo hits Skelter and Scythe with storm bursts, which just look like lightning, but whatever, and checks in on Jean. Turns out it wasn't the attack that made her fall, but having made a psychic lock on Luna Maximoff, which she's been trying to maintain. With the last of the goons taken down, Psyche confronts their president, but he starts falling like a bad souffle, as he's really a shapeshifter in their leader's place, which really makes that earlier scene of him wanting everyone to die all that more confusing. Though, since Cortez can apparently hear them anyway, maybe through a listening device, I don't know, they never say, Scott promises to bring the conflict to Cortez's door and down his throat.
I'm sure if Wolverine were there, his vote would have been the proctology route.
Meanwhile, in the wild blue yonder, which is actually glowing rather redly just now. Actually, it looks more pink, and if it's red over blue, shouldn't it be purple? Well, Rhodey is trying to find a way through Exodus's defenses when the mutant begins gloating about being of the superior species, meant to be a master, while other lesser beings are meant to be slaves. That's when Rhodes loses it and goes full battering ram, which makes you wonder if Exodus would have said those things if he knew what War Machine looked like under that helmet.
You are an insect, a creature of inferior stock. At best, you should be grateful to so much as be a servant to your genetic superiors. I didn't mean it like that. I mean, all humans are inferior to mutants. I mean, not that you're any more or less inferior than white humans. I loved Black Panther.
Actually, Jim played right into Exodus's hands, getting close enough to use a psionic attack intended to leave him a vegetable. And War Machine falls engulfed in a strange aura. But then arrives a new challenger, not merely human, but the eternal Circe, who's leaking kryptonite from her eyes.
Bringing that issue to a close. We've seen the fighting progress, but not much else, and sometimes the art could get a little indistinct with some details. There were moments where the dialogue was either silly or just out of character, though I couldn't tell if that was true of U.S. Agent because I haven't seen that he has much of a personality yet. We continue the review with Uncanny X-Men number 307.
Written by Scott Lobdell, with art by John Romita Jr., Dan Green, and the colorist team of Buccellato and Somers, the cover has Rhodey's dance partner seemingly rising from a pillar of flames from the ground. On his left is Cortez clutching Luna, and to his right are the girl's parents alongside Jean Grey and Wanda. And men have named him Exodus,
which is why he got beat up so much at school.
We open to a splash page of Charles Xavier shielding a bandage-wrapped child from blaster fire, swearing not to let him be killed. Narration details the original plan of being part of a peace envoy to war-ravaged Genosha, but Baldy had plans of his own.
This is what you get for not using Travelocity, or Travago, or Priceline, whichever one of them will pay me for an endorsement.
On yet another two-page spread, Beast and U.S. Agent are fighting the Magistrate Elite, while one of the soldiers, can't really tell which one because, again, they forgot the tail to a speech bubble, tries rationalizing the concentration camp as a means of preventing the spread of disease that currently seems exclusive to mutates. But given the dialogue, there seems to be paranoia about it spreading to humans. Right about now, not several gunshots ago, is when Charles deals a savage psychic attack that aids in the downfall of the soldiers, though Agent is confused. Someone the Prof calls Philip, with 2 L's, muses that the vaunted geneticist and mutant rights advocate is a mutant himself, with some astonishment, as Chuck himself influences the child he protected to sleep, promising the nightmare will be over when he wakes. And it's actually a really nice moment.
Given the infrequency of my personal X-Men collecting, it's easy to forget that there was a time where Professor X wasn't exactly vocal about his own mutant powers. Understandable from one perspective, as people would have been extra suspicious of a mutant that advocated for equality that could also literally change your mind. But also hypocritical, since he sends other mutants into battle with catchy codenames and flashy costumes. But something concerns me a bit more.
Is this supposed to be Philip Moreau, who met with Xavier at the mansion with Gyrick and Agent? Because he had 1 L in his name. And if that's Philip, this is probably Jennifer. And last we saw the both of them, Beast and Prof, ditched them on their own mission. We at least saw Agent sneak a ride, but if these are the Phil and Jen we know before, how did they end up at the same spot as the Professor and Beast?
Or is this supposed to be a different Philip, and they thought that second L in his name would have been distinctive enough to differentiate him from another character with absolutely no distinctive traits at all?
And what about all those commandos from before? Why aren't they joining in on this? Anyway, the self-styled mutant messiah Exodus is blasted into a building, adding to Genosha's rubble to standing structure ratio. Circe is not impressed, but she does get ensnared by a psionic field, as Exodus reveals that while his powers start off psionic in nature, there's much more to it than that, assumedly proven by the pain the woman's consciousness must be enduring. She calls him an overpowered amateur, and he apparently takes offense, spouting off more about his alleged superiority and causing a massive explosion that you have to turn the comic on its side to continue reading. Her fellow Avengers resolve to stop them before the island is destroyed, and Black Knight takes a moment to remind himself, and the reader, that he talked Captain America into this mission. The horizontal reading continues on the next page, where we're back at the UN gathering, where Chairwoman Black Widow announces the order to withdraw active Avengers from Genosha and apologizes for defying the UN. She then turns it into a kind of backhanded speech, saying the Avengers won't be a party to politics of cowardice.
I could see why the comic was turned on its side for that earlier explosion, to give a better sense of distance and impact to the surrounding areas. But here, the effect just doesn't seem as necessary, so I don't know why they kept it going on this page. Especially since it goes back to normal on the very next page, no ads in between or anything.
As the assembly listens, Natasha continues that she won't apologize, save, perhaps, to all Avengers for losing sight of why they do what they do. While allying with the UN seemed to better facilitate their efforts, heroism is not, by definition, easy, and being one of Earth's mightiest heroes means having the courage to make tough decisions, and strong conviction to act upon them. She officially ends the Avengers Charter with the UN, and the team leaves. Though Spider-Woman stops Hawkeye in mid-gloat, the Archer takes solace in how, despite previous disagreements with the team, he knows they'd done the right thing today.
I can't pinpoint what it is exactly, but I don't find myself overly gripped by Black Widow's speech here. Sure, it's nice to see her tell off the UN for not letting superheroes superhero, but there seems to be a level of vagueness to her words that seem to lose traction for me. That, and they seem to hint that Widow would disagree with Hawkeye, but if that were the case, why agree with him now? There was never an indication of internal struggle for the spy.
Back in Genosha, narration details that the world once saw the green and pleasant land as an ideal, until it was revealed its facade was held up by mutate slaves. A year after helping liberate them, the X-Men are back fighting the formerly oppressed people as they force their way into a building and start freeing human captives. They are happy to be free, but not so thrilled to be saved by mutants. After mentioning Jean and Quicksilver splitting off-panel, but not why, Cyclops enters a room of dead bodies. It's a somber, quiet moment as Scott Summers mourns the massive deaths due to happenstance of birth, trying to take some solace from Iceman's point that they've managed to save many other people today. That's gotta count for something, right? Yeah, Bobby. For something.
I must say, I much prefer this Cyclops to the one of recent years who killed Professor X without regret, more or less cheated on his wife, and did a slew of other things that I've heard have basically killed his character. Great job on that, Marvel! Idiots.
Oh boy, more comic turning, and it's a 2-page spread. Is this Marvel's idea of getting their readers to exercise? Black Knight figures he can calm Cersei down as she's in something of a stalemate with Exodus, only for a nearby bus to explode in front of him before he can get too close. Fortunately, War Machine saved him with a force field, which is dropped just as Exodus appears. He flies off, leaving Dane wondering where he's seen this guy before.
Well, geez, left field, watch it with the subplot. You're gonna put someone's eye out. Or the lens of their sunglasses.
Turn the comic back to standard as Cersei emerges from the dust and rubble, saying she need only catch her breath and be told the direction of her opponent. But Black Knight orders her to stand down, saying that the ferocity of their battle has made them part of the problem rather than the solution.
Hey, I'm pretty sure that bus was exploded before it blew up. I may need to lie down for a minute or two.
Back to the horizontal format. Quicksilver has used his speed, and the impatience that came with it, to check for any way into the Citadel in the Genoshan capital from the sewers, with no luck, even though Jean told him that seconds prior just before he took off. And we get this gratuitous butt shot of Miss Gray, but to the artist's credit, it's not as detailed as in some of the comics I reviewed. Since Fabian Cortez can amplify or dampen a mutant's abilities on contact, they aren't going to take the fight to him directly and risk him screwing with Jean's powers, like the telekinesis she uses to bust a hole in the wall. She takes 3 panels to basically say that Cortez only cares about himself, and exacerbated the island's already volatile state. Feels kinda padded, I must say, but maybe it's just a setup to restate how angry Maximoff is at his daughter's abduction. For the second time on the page. Seriously, do you think readers have that bad a memory? As they advance, Jean's psi probe is knocked back at her. Pietro reacts quicker than he thinks, grasping the neck of someone in the shadows, only to discover it is his estranged wife, and they embrace. For weeks he has rehearsed this moment in his head. Candlelight, music. Aside from the mud, the cold, the stench, he finds he prefers the reality over his fantasy.
What about nearly hitting his wife with a barrage of super speed punches? You sure he wouldn't have wanted to avoid that?
Crystal confirms that they're aware of Luna's predicament, kinda weird he didn't assume she already knew, and that they were on their way to Cortez when they were surprised by the X-Men, hence Wanda's earlier hex bolt against Jean. Chris only cares about getting her daughter, for whom Pietro says they need to put their marital problems on hold. And wouldn't you know it, that's when a haggard-looking Cortez lurks out of the shadows. Before Quicksilver can react, Jean, looking a lot like the Wicked Witch of the West after getting hit with a water balloon, warns him not to try anything, just as Fabian dangles Luna in front of him. He threatens to use his powers on her, which he's never tried on a human, and Pietro blocks an attack from Scarlet Witch, knowing that all Cortez needs is mere contact with another mutant's powers in order to manipulate them. Fabian, meanwhile, complains about Magneto not dying when he should have and letting the shyster lead the acolytes, instead returning with a red-faced devil he never would have recruited had he suspected something. Pietro swears they'll protect him if he'll return Luna. No dice, as something blasts into the tunnels from above. It's Exodus, reminding the would-be leader of a previous threat to hurl him into oblivion. The comic ends as Cortez declares the only way he'll release Luna is if Exodus is destroyed.
The writing had its ups and downs. Some lines were a little too cheesy for their own good, but others were actually nicely done. I like Romita's art style, but even that lent itself to an unexpected turn or two.
We got plenty of action, which is always nice, but I don't feel the story was advanced that much. There was the teased drama of the Avengers possibly breaking up over a disagreement with their UN charter, but I don't feel that the later result had the kind of weight it should have. Maybe it's because when this kind of story has come up before, there's been more of a debate with neither side necessarily being wrong in principle, but having valid concerns. Here, Nat just says, "We're gonna save people, mic drop, end of story."
And if Cortez can affect the powers of other mutants, even if they just so much as use their powers on him from a distance, why is he so frightened of Exodus? Tune in next week and we may find out that answer. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues. Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the final chapter of Bloodties. With a handful of Avengers trying to quell the violence in the streets of Genosha's capital, and Professor Xavier leading the rescue of sick mutates from a concentration camp, the X-Men take the fight to the followers of Fabian Cortez. He, however, has taken to the sewers with Luna Maximoff as hostage. Her parents Quicksilver and Crystal, along with Scarlet Witch and Jean Grey, are given only one path to the child's safe return: the death of Exodus.
Avengers number 369 is written by Bob Harris with art by Steve Epting, Jan Duursema, Tom Palmer, and Mike Rockwitz. The cover is silver foil featuring Exodus dead center posturing, while Quicksilver and Crystal are each on one knee holding hands.
It actually looks a lot less like the conclusion to a big story and more like a wedding being officiated at a comic book convention.
Not exactly sure why they went this route for it, though. Doesn't seem to be a special anniversary issue. Maybe they were just really amped for the conclusion. Anyway, the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier is headed towards Genosha when Nick Fury receives telemetry on their destination, which he passes on to Black Widow, who then responds they'd best pray for the world. 7 minutes ago, a strange force field engulfed the entire island, cutting it off from the rest of the world. Around that time, Exodus made his appearance in the sewers before Fabian Cortez, who still clutches Luna Maximoff, much to the distress of the girl's parents, Aunt Wanda, and Jean Grey. Though I think there's a coloring mistake. Someone seems to have colored Cortez's shirt the same as his skin, but was clearly meant to have a different outline and texture. Way to go, artists. Now he's gonna catch cold.
Though, given the narration, they've all been standing there for 7 minutes not doing anything. At some point it stops being a tense moment and just becomes loitering.
Cortez says it's too late now. The hero should have listened to him, and Exodus is a significantly greater threat. The head acolyte pleads for common ground, but that just makes Fabian charge his hand to further threaten Luna. Pietro attempts to intervene, but Exodus stops him in his tracks, saying he's Magneto's only true heir now, given how the Maximoff twins long ago forsook their father's ambitions. Wanda holds back Crystal for Luna's safety as Exodus approaches Cortez, taking over his motor functions to retrieve Luna and unleashing a decisive psychic attack that seems to kill Fabian, if not just lobotomizing him. With Magneto avenged of this former acolyte's betrayal, Exodus decides to keep his master's granddaughter, claiming the rest of his flesh and blood family abrogated their rights, and like Magneto would want, intends to make all of Genosha pay for its sins. Topside, Trish Tilby, reporter and on-again, off-again girlfriend of Hank McCoy, is covering the end of one battle among many in Hammer Bay, as the X-Men have worked to protect the human government officials from mutate assault, despite being the ones that passed the oppressive legislation. They also apprehend some mutates, one of whom is in a teeth-gnashing contest with Bishop, while another argues with Gambit. Cyclops tells Trish that Beast is around, somewhere, when they finally notice how weird the sky is looking, informed that it was Exodus' doing by the arriving Avengers.
Who look like they're about to attack. I mean, War Machine's helmet always looks like that, and Cersei looks more like she's just going with the flow, but Cap and Black Knight seriously look ticked off and ready to punch someone. This makes more sense as a generic poster than a progression of the scene.
Narration informs that the last time these two teams met, they fought over Magneto's rights in the Extinction Agenda storyline. And even though Crystal's daughter may have been the catalyst for the Avengers' involvement, they were still morally outraged by the violence on the island. And, hey, Gambit, Rogue's eyes are up there, to your left. She can see you checking out Cersei. But I digress. The field appeared shortly after Exodus' fight with Cersei, and is also blocking their communications with the outside world. Standing beside Captain America, Storm tells them all that regardless of past differences, how Luna is not the only link between the teams, but a reminder that they share a great deal in their histories, the best option now is to join forces and end the bloodshed. She and War Machine start by checking out the barrier, noticing that while air currents are slower to heed the Wind Rider's commands, Rhodey's scanners aren't picking up any kind of energy signature. Believing the field to be an illusion, James flies into it only to be repelled back, now with disabled circuitry. Foolish, foolish man. Curiosity has killed more than a cat in its day.
Oi! Save now, scold later! Though she has a point. Wouldn't it have made more sense to throw something solid at the barrier first? A rock, a dud grenade, or maybe a bolt of lightning or energy blast to check for some kind of reaction?
Ororo catches him, though nearly losing her arm in the process, but can't slow their descent because of the sluggish winds. Fortunately, Cersei arrives and they make a safe landing. Rhodes admits he chose his actions poorly and now his defensive systems are shot, but his scanners really didn't pick anything up. Storm suggests the barrier could be psionic, which wouldn't be detected by most scanning devices, but could potentially interfere with her weather manipulation. Exodus being telekinetic makes sense given his fight with Cersei, and that's when they're simultaneously hit by an urgent psychic emoji from Professor Xavier. The Beast and I are in danger. Hundreds of innocents are threatened. Oh, and a knockoff Captain America. Hey!
You know what you are!
Come at once, if you can. Yeah, that's a face that says, get here when it's convenient, doesn't it, folks? The angry faces keep rolling as Scott orders Iceman to stay behind and tend to the wounded with Revenge, whom we've seen very sparsely in this story, but nowhere in this issue. They leave with the Avengers, except War Machine, I guess, but Gambit stays behind briefly, thinking Bobby seems upset. He is, because Psyche still treats him like a goofy teenager, and I'm not sure why we get this moment. It doesn't seem to be built up much or serve much purpose to the overall story. We jump to Charlie and the Beast, coming this fall to NBC, as we see U.S. Agent Philip, losing that second L, his apparent love interest Jen, and now Henry Peter Gyrick from out of nowhere.
I'm not really sure if they just keep forgetting about this subplot with Xavier and this third faction in the war, or they have so much going on with the X-Men and Avengers proper that they neglect to detail it. Gyrick just appeared as suddenly as Phil and Jen did in the previous issue in the last episode. What next? Are the Fantastic Four going to suddenly show up? Why not Batman? He's everywhere already.
How about Chuck Norris with a BB gun?
The group and the mutate prisoners are pinned down by magistrate forces, too well psi-shielded in their great numbers for the world's greatest telepath to attack. As Agent tries to alleviate Gyrick's worry about his imminent death protecting mutants, Charles's friend and third-party rebel leader Renee, who's also here suddenly because shut-up reasons, is shot. Fortunately, it's right after that, on a second consecutive two-page spread, the combined X-Men and Avengers burst onto the scene as the much-needed cavalry, taking the fight to the magistrate.
We could combine our team names to something, I don't know, like, the Uncanny Avengers. That'd never work.
And while I've never been much of a follower of the Avengers, it's really fun to watch these teams fight together. Granted, there are some lost details here and there, but there are some little things that I do enjoy about this, like the lighting effect of Bishop's blaster and the fun banter, like Rogue telling a pilot about her last trip to Genosha as she destroys his plane. After some multi-page ads for a Punisher storyline and something involving the New Warriors, Captain America has it confirmed for him that they're escaping a bona fide concentration camp, so the Star-Spangled Man fights with greater ferocity. That's something I'd like to see elaborated upon in more panels, but the magistrate starts falling back. Archangel and Rogue begin taking the injured to a nearby campsite as Chuck is told of Exodus' presence and how Jean, along with Magneto's family, have gone off on their own. Rogue returns for another delivery when the professor warns she'll be wanted as well, and she suddenly falls from the air. It was another attack from Exodus, whom we join back in the sewers, striking at the Southern Belle for having spurned Magneto's affections in the past.
Dude, this is why your dating service never took off. Very few customers want bad dates to end up in psychically forced comas.
Pietro insists that his father's lackey is little more than a sycophant, too afraid of living his own life and thinking his own thoughts, so he latches entirely to someone else's. That apparently strikes a nerve, or maybe Exodus thinks it would have hit one of Magneto's, as he psionically increases Quicksilver's already increased metabolism. Wanda tells him to man up and just kill them quickly, and the Acolyte says their deaths, and that of the island's populace, will be offered as a testament to Eric Lencher's suffering. We briefly cut back to the helicarrier closing in on the island, with Black Widow noting how gracious Fury has been since the brawl with S.H.I.E.L.D. at the Avengers Mansion. Hey, come on, Widow Lady. You know a tussle does the boys good every now and then.
Sure, their doctors don't agree with that, but what do they know?
So, the Avengers quit the UN, but wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. under orders to stop them? Nick didn't like it, but he was still following orders, so what changed? Is he defying orders or following new ones? No one in the comic asks the question, so why provide an answer, right? Their scans show no energy to the barrier, but Vision calculates that it's reduced in size by 14% since it materialized, meaning it's a weapon intended to crush the island and its people. Meanwhile, Rogue is still breathing after Exodus's telepathic assault, meaning he's much more powerful than Charles thought upon their first encounter. The flattered extremist arrives, with Jean and the others under his control, announcing to the mutates that Magneto is alive, but recovering from serious wounds. In the meantime, Exodus acts as his voice, his eyes, and executor of his will. even repeating his line about being heir in spirit if not in body from before. Seeing Genosha as a blight to Magnus's teachings, the island will be crushed unless all humans are slaughtered. And somehow Xavier sees this as a boy seeking to fill a giant's shoes, which may be the key to their salvation.
All right, then. We'll try jiggling keys. If that doesn't work, we'll put them in timeout. And if that doesn't work, I've got my backup super-sized jiggling keys.
Weird thing is, Exodus doesn't seem to be bellowing or yelling or anything, just speaking normally for him. But the ones in closest proximity are the X-Men, Avengers, and recently saved prisoners. The ones that we really haven't seen in a while. Maybe he's also giving this ultimatum telepathically, because we see shadowed figures begin to rise up, wanting to slay flat scans, their fears being amplified by the self-described savior to drive them to murder. The professor thinks that even though time is running out, that may also work in their favor. Captain America suggests splitting their focus. One group prevents a bloodbath, while the other takes on Magneto's right-hand mutant. And Revanche is suddenly there. Wasn't she supposed to hang back some distance with Bobby? They haven't really given much geographical context, but still, where'd she come from?
I'm not really familiar with Revanche or Revanche or however that's supposed to be pronounced, but I'm pretty sure her powers don't involve just popping up in random places like Nightcrawler after someone spiked the communion wine.
As the protection team goes to stop the mutates they just freed from killing humans, Xavier elaborates to his activist companions that their animosity was always present, but Exodus is merely amplifying it, even though his powers can only be stretched so far. Bobby gets to punch people, Renee talks at Revanche, and either that's a typo or U.S. agent thinks her surname is Majcoomb. Must be a typo because Iceman calls her the same thing on the next page. However, he knows her. And hilariously enough, Revanche, who got maybe one kick in this entire adventure of being seen more rarely than Waldo, has been taken down by Cortez's Unforgiven, now working in Exodus's name.
Blood ties, where things happen.
Team Punch the Fascist launches their attack, only to be cast aside, while their allies are held in a telekinetic bubble. Huh. I figured when they said that Jean and the group were all in Exodus's thrall, that meant he'd be controlling them, having them fight each other, but I guess not. After the Acolyte again gloats about he's the true successor to Magneto, attention is called to the sky where the dome begins to collapse on some of the city's towers. Black Knight begins slowly moving in, with Charles stating their enemy is nearing his limit. "I still see humans alive! Have you no faith?"
If you're not going to kill humans more quickly, maybe I'll just leave you all uncrushed and go home. Maybe I'll give up my child hostage while I'm at it. Let's see some murderous fundamentals, people!
Exodus raises Luna up, labeling her humanity an abomination to Magneto's lineage, and the scene becomes kind of horrifically quiet as narration intercedes. It appropriately illustrates the emotions compounding the mood alongside the visuals of horrified parents and their frightened child. A second, perhaps two, is all the time Charles Xavier has. A second, perhaps two, is all the time Charles Xavier needs. He launches an intense psychic blast, but not with the debilitating effect one would hope, as Exodus saw it coming.
Didn't even drop my hostage. Look, Ma, one-handed!
He was not, however, expecting an assault from the Black Knight, his Nero sword overloading his psi powers already taxed system, and he falls. Dane catches Luna, holding her long enough for her parents to embrace their child once again. Well, Crystal, anyway. Pietro doesn't look as happy as he should, like, even remotely. I know he's been a moody doofus this whole story, but this is the time for him to remove the stick. Professor X begins a monologue about how humans and mutants need to learn to coexist, or the whole world will end up as ravaged as Genosha. What the mutates suffered was horrendous, but it was no excuse for their murderous intent. Cutting down innocent lives in the streets grants freedom to no one. Not only have they become as bad as their oppressors, they chose to follow one who would slaughter small children. Where is the glory in that? Where is the humanity? Where, finally, is your great moral victory?
1 sec, let me ask my Twitter followers.
The barrier falls, and Exodus gets to his feet, told by Chuck that he's too young and overly proud of his powers, and how his downfall came from Jean secretly probing his defenses and relaying the info back to Xavier. Exodus takes it in stride, claiming his youth means he can refine his abilities to become the leader of the new generation, while the professor declines and fades away. He leaves, but not before attacking Quicksilver with heat vision?
Can he do that? I forget if he can do that. This isn't like Dragon Ball Z where you see a character use laser beams from their eyes once and then for the rest of the series they completely forget they can do that.
Oh, right, psionic eye blasts. Silly me, I forgot. Pietro isn't breathing, and Dane furiously begins chest compressions, but to no avail. Except it was totally to a whole bunch of avail because he's okay. Quicksilver's a bit weak, but almost cracks a smile as he gets to hold his daughter, and Crystal thanks her fellow Avenger. The epilogue is set the day after war, as the helicarrier is prepped to deliver supplies and rations to Genoshans in need. Captain America and Charles Xavier watch from across the shore as Jennifer Ransom approaches, she being the mutant activist you might have forgotten about since she said she was a mutate, but never really showed off her powers or did anything. Anyway, she calls Charles a hypocrite, since his speech was nice, but he's still a powerful mutant that's kept his abilities secret from the world. Cap steps up to defend the prof, but Charles feels she has every right to be offended. It was simpler when he started the X-Men, feeling a human advocate for mutants worked in the best interest of his students and the dream of a unified world. But now, he is not so sure. The story concludes with Captain America saying that in a world where people find any excuse to hate and kill each other, how can anyone be sure of anything?
And that was Bloodties. And for all the potential in its premise, it had a lot of hiccups along the way.
As a follow-up to Fatal Attractions and the nullifying of Magneto's brain for a while, it's a great idea, and involving Luna Maximoff plays nicely into that. The uncertainty of Magneto and his presence or his plans to everyone in the world except the X-Men, as well as possibly being influenced by real-life events in Bosnia at the time, Genosha made sense as a backdrop to the various events at work. But all these subplots going on kind of worked against it. None of the events felt all that interconnected until the last chapter, mostly akin to different events occurring at the same time by coincidence. Maybe there was some payoff to the Black Knight recognizing Exodus and the big mystery surrounding him, but it wasn't here. Then you have Xavier's side quest to liberate the concentration camp. He separates from his main UN envoy, meets up with a bunch of freedom fighters that never show up again except for Renee. U.S. agent sneaks along, apparently unaffected by this sudden change in plans to someone he's supposed to be escorting, and the others in the envoy just up and appear with no context.
It was kind of like how Revanche just suddenly popped up, didn't really do anything except kick a guy, and then immediately got knocked out. Except Gyric's envoy did a lot more and actually had dialogue. Yet somehow Philip and Jen seemed much more forgettable.
I know I mentioned that stuff earlier in the review, but, well, this comic got pretty repetitive with some of its dialogue, so why shouldn't I? Then you have the Avengers' squabble with the UN. The team is understandably mad that they aren't doing anything to help Genosha, and that they had S.H.I.E.L.D. sicked on them to keep them in line, and after some false tension, Black Widow just ends their charter. Maybe it would have had more impact for me if I was current on the Avengers comics at the time, but this doesn't explain why Fury, who was so adamant about following his orders to stay out, just chaperones the Earth's mightiest heroes to the island he previously tried keeping them away from. And beyond that, the whole argument of whether or not the team should go isn't really a debate or an argument, it's just a one-sided thing. It didn't provide enough substantial conflict to feel appropriately tense or even all that interesting.
Don't get me wrong, I prefer superheroes to stop wholesale slaughter whenever possible, but they didn't even get that much resistance besides, "It's a civil matter concerning Genoshans, nothing we can do about it."
The way I see it, either the UN didn't have the kind of conviction to justify their passive stance, or none of the writers thought it was necessary to give an opposing view. Not so much to validate the violence, but rather because there would be someone against interfering in sovereign affairs, despite possibly having understandable reasons, and Widow, Hawkeye, anyone would need to respond.
The third Captain America movie asked a very similar question, and while it wasn't answered definitively, they at least let you see where each side was coming from. Maybe the writers didn't exactly want this story to be that in-depth, because it really feels like the UN was more of a mild inconvenience.
And I have to question Cortez's plan. He's scared of Magneto, so he decides to start a bloody uprising in an island nation known for mutant enslavement. As a get-out-of-magnetic doom-free card, he has one of his goons abduct his grandchild. Like that wouldn't just make Magneto angrier. If Eric weren't a blank slate, I imagine he could descend upon Genosha with a welcoming facade, insist on holding his grandkid, and either get the child back, or have the populace turn on Fabian when he refuses. And beyond that, Cortez wouldn't have much to fear from Exodus, who'd still be at Magnus's command. And heck, even Exodus's threat level kept fluctuating, more so than the color of Luna's onesie. He's supposed to be an oh-so-scary, powerful guy, but his attacks on War Machine and Rogue failed to do what he'd intended. Heck, even Fabian couldn't stay down. He just popped up again a few years later, and it was only implied that Mr. Sinister may have been responsible.
Unfortunately, they never explain why Cortez couldn't use his powers in defense against Exodus. Was he just so powerful that his psionics couldn't be dampened to safe levels? And if Fabian's powers work by altering levels of mutant power output, would they even work on a human at all to any capacity, dangerous or otherwise? And who was changing Luna's diapers during all this?
I feel they did go a little overboard with the 2-page spreads, but at least they felt full and somewhat justified, not just extreme close-ups or filler. Yet the horizontal format didn't feel that necessary in its own frequency. The art wasn't bad, but I will say that there were some coloring errors here and there, like Scythe's armor colored red instead of silver, and moments where things were either very crowded by characters and dialogue or blended into the background, becoming unnoticeable. Then you have the lack of location specifics, and some characters just popping up wherever, whenever, or in some cases just not doing or saying anything. These scenes lend themselves to some confusion. And would it have killed Pietro to smile more when his child was rescued? Does he think he's in one of the DC movies?
When all is said and done, Bloodties had a lot going for it, and worked as a means of getting together two of Marvel's biggest teams. But it did seem like they lost focus along the way, and that risks hurting the overall message Xavier's always tried to get across. Next week, Year of the Crossover continues, when one of my favorite comic book characters teams up with someone I know absolutely nothing about. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.